Boy mauled by beaver. Rabid beaver attacks 8-year-old boy at New Jersey lake as family fights back in dramatic rescue. A peaceful evening of family fishing turned into a terrifying fight for survival after a rabid beaver viciously attacked an 8-year-old boy at a lake in New Jersey, leaving multiple people injured and sparking panic among visitors. Now it's time to dig deeper and understand the full story through this AI podcast.
When you picture a perfect Sunday evening at a local park, there's like a very specific, idyllic painting that comes to mind for most of us.
Oh, absolutely. The classic suburban sunset.
Yeah, exactly. You picture the golden hour sunlight filtering through the trees, and the water in the lake is totally still, like glass.
Right. Very peaceful.
Right. Maybe there's a family out there, lines cast in the water, just enjoying a quiet, mundane moment of fishing before the work week starts up again.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate picture of domestic suburban tranquility.
Well, and we build these spaces specifically to be predictable, right?
Yeah.
A manicured municipal park is designed to offer the illusion that we have successfully tamed nature. We just assume these parks are entirely our domain, functioning by our rules.
Totally. But for this deep dive, we are taking that perfect, tranquil painting of a Sunday afternoon, and we are completely shredding it.
We really are.
Because we've got a massive stack of sources today. We're talking local police reports from Mahwah, New Jersey, public health bulletins, wildlife biology research papers, and some pretty intense deep dives into veterinary virology.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
It is. And our mission today is to synthesize all of this, to understand a bizarre and honestly horrifying incident where a peaceful fishing trip violently collided with the severe microscopic realities of nature.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about an 8-year-old boy and his family who were violently attacked at a local lake by a rabid beaver.
And, the contrast is what makes this case so vital to analyze. It strips away that illusion of the manicured park you were talking about.
Right, because you just don't expect it.
Exactly. When people think of dangerous wildlife encounters, the mind immediately goes to, remote, untamed wilderness.
Yeah, you think of apex predators.
Right. Grizzly bears, sharks, mountain lions. So, a beaver interrupting a Sunday fishing trip, it shatters our mental models of safety. It forces you to look at the actual biological and ecological mechanics happening, just beneath the surface of that calm water.
So let's get right into the timeline of the attack, because the shift from relaxing Sunday to absolute terror happened in a matter of seconds.
Literally seconds.
So we are looking at Lake Henry. This is located inside Continental Soldiers Park in the Mahwah municipality near Newark.
Right.
It's shortly before 6 p.m. on a Sunday. This 8-year-old boy is just fishing with his family, and out of nowhere, a beaver charges at him.
Just completely unprovoked.
Yeah. Witnesses on the scene describe the animal as unusually violent and totally relentless. And my first thought here is about the basic evolutionary response.
The fight or flight.
Exactly. If you see a large animal charging at you, your brain just screams flight. You drop the fishing pole and you run.
And flight is really the only logical biological choice for a child in that scenario. I mean, the suddenness of an attack in broad daylight in a highly populated suburban park, it catches the nervous system entirely off guard. There is zero mental preparation.
You're just frozen for a second, and then you bolt.
Right. But the mechanics of a panicked retreat often introduce a secondary hazard. The boy attempted to run, but in his panic, he tripped and fell to the ground.
Which completely changes the entire geometry of the situation.
He really does.
Because when you're upright, you have mobility, you have your legs under you, and you have a height advantage over a ground-dwelling animal.
Yes.
But the moment you fall, you lose all kinetic momentum, and your vital areas are suddenly on the exact same horizontal plane as the threat.
That fall dictated the outcome of the initial charge. It instantly removed the spatial distance between the child and the animal.
Oh, man.
Yeah. Being on the ground removes your bipedal leverage. It gave this enraged animal the exact opening it needed to close the gap and latch onto the boy's thigh with a severe bite.
It's just a sudden catastrophic shift in physical vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I want to focus on that word you just used, latch.
Latch.
Because it didn't just nip him as he ran by and scurry away. It grabbed hold.
It did.
And to truly understand the terror of this moment, we have to talk about the physical reality of the attacker. Culturally, we are conditioned by cartoons to think of beavers as cute, chubby, industrious little dam builders.
Oh, the cartoon image is so misleading.
Right. We picture them chewing on twigs. Even the term rodent makes you think of a mouse or a hamster, like something you can just kick off your shoe.
Cartoons do us a massive disservice when it comes to assessing biological threats.
Clearly.
I mean, Castor canadensis, the North American beaver, is the second largest rodent in the world,
The second largest.
surpassed only by the capybara in South America. They are commonly found in New Jersey, and while they generally avoid humans, adult beavers are formidable.
Okay, so how big are we talking?
We are talking about an animal that measures 3 to 4 feet in length and weighs anywhere between 30 and 70 pounds.
Wait, 70 pounds. So we aren't talking about a pest. At 70 pounds, you are looking at the weight and mass of a large dog,
Oh, easily.
like a golden retriever or a German shepherd. And the sheer mechanics of their bite is something else entirely.
It's entirely unique.
Because if a dog bites you, you're dealing with puncture wounds from canines. But a beaver's jaws are biologically engineered to fell hardwood trees.
Literally to chop down trees, yes.
I was reading through the biological research in our sources, and it explains that their incisors are fortified with iron.
Yes, that's what gives them that orange color.
Yeah, exactly. And their master jaw muscles are incredibly dense. They're essentially organic bolt cutters.
Organic bolt cutters is a great way to put it. The biomechanics of the beaver's jaw are terrifying in this context.
I can imagine.
Their teeth are actually self-sharpening because the softer dentin on the back wears away faster than the iron-rich enamel on the front. Oh, wow. So they always have a fresh edge.
Constantly creating a chisel edge. So when an animal with that musculoskeletal structure and a 70-pound mass latches onto the thigh of an 8-year-old child.
Who probably weighs roughly the same as the animal itself.
Exactly. It ceases to be a simple bite. It is an extreme physical trauma. The leverage they can apply with those jaws is immense.
It's basically a one-on-one grappling match with an animal carrying industrial shears in its mouth.
That is essentially what was
And
happening.
that brings us to the rescue attempt, which is where the story escalates from a shock encounter into full-blown chaos.
Total chaos.
According to Mahwah Police Captain Michael Blondin, a family friend immediately rushed in to help. This person started repeatedly kicking and striking the beaver to break its grip on the boy's leg.
Which is the normal response to strike the threat.
Right, but the beaver wouldn't let go. And I'm thinking, if I kick a feral dog or a raccoon, the pain stimulus almost always overrides its aggression and it runs away. Yeah, under any normal biological parameters, a wild animal's fundamental survival instinct is self-preservation.
Right, keep yourself alive.
A strike from an adult human registers as a massive life-ending threat. The animal calculates that the energy expenditure and the risk of injury are too high, and it retreats.
But this one didn't.
No. The fact that this animal absorbed blunt force trauma and maintained its bite indicates a complete suspension of its natural biological imperatives.
Which is terrifying.
Right.
Because kicking it wasn't working. The situation demanded a massive escalation.
People had to get involved.
Yeah, multiple family members and friends realized the child was in critical danger, so they physically jumped into the water to engage this animal.
Which is a huge risk.
We have 3 adults essentially wrestling this 70-pound beaver. They grabbed it, they literally slammed it into the water to break the attack, and then they tried to retreat toward the shore.
It's incredible bravery.
But jumping into the water to fight a beaver seems like giving up your only advantage.
Oh, it absolutely is. The aquatic environment completely changes the physics of combat.
How so?
Well, humans are terrestrial. In water, we lose our ability to generate force from the ground. Our strikes are dampened by water resistance. Our balance is compromised, and our mobility is drastically reduced.
You just can't move the way you want to.
Exactly. Beavers, conversely, are semi-aquatic mammals. They are hydrodynamically designed to be powerful and agile in the water.
So they have the home field advantage.
Big time. So you have multiple humans operating at a severe physical disadvantage, trying to grapple with an animal that is essentially in its optimal element.
It's insane.
The sheer exertion of kinetic energy required to manage a thrashing 70-pound muscular animal in that environment is staggering.
It is absolute pandemonium.
Yeah.
And the beaver didn't just swim away after being slammed, it kept pursuing them.
Relentlessly.
During this chaotic retreat to the shore, one rescuer falls backward in the water while the beaver's actively trying to bite him again.
Oh my goodness.
Another family member manages to briefly pin the animal's head underwater. Someone else is kicking it away. And finally, one of the rescuers manages to physically pick up this heavy, thrashing animal and literally hurls it several feet through the air, back out into the lake.
Just stop and visualize the momentum required to throw a 70-pound object, let alone an aggressive thrashing one, while standing in water.
It's almost superhuman.
It points to the sheer adrenaline and desperation of the rescuers. They are overriding their own safety instincts, operating purely on the imperative to protect the child.
But the nightmare didn't end with the throw. Even after being hurled through the air and crashing into the lake, this aggressive animal didn't dive deep and swim away.
No, it didn't retreat.
It stayed at the surface and just kept circling them in the water. Meanwhile, a small white dog belonging to one of the families is standing at the water's edge, frantically barking at it.
It's a surreal scene.
This animal took strikes, was pinned underwater, was thrown through the air, and still returned to circle its targets.
And that circling behavior is the crucial diagnostic clue here.
What does that tell us?
We are witnessing an organism that has been entirely stripped of its self-preservation hardware. A healthy animal does not sustain a pursuit against overwhelming physical force from multiple larger adversaries.
Because it knows it's outmatched.
Exactly. The sustained aggression, despite physical trauma, tells us its neurological system was fundamentally compromised. It was operating under the influence of a pathogen.
Which pivots this entire deep dive from a physical wrestling match into a microscopic battle.
A very dangerous one.
Because the physical fight ended when they got back to shore, but for everyone involved, a much more insidious threat had just been unleashed. Mahwah Township authorities confirmed that the beaver's carcass was eventually recovered and tested, and it came back positive for rabies.
And that single piece of data recontextualizes the entire event.
Everything changes.
It immediately elevates the incident from a traumatic physical injury to a highly critical life-or-death medical emergency for the entire group.
Right. We know the 8-year-old boy was rushed to the hospital. Officials haven't disclosed the full extent of his muscular or tissue injuries from the bite itself.
Hopefully he recovers well from the physical trauma.
Yeah, but the danger extended far beyond him. Authorities confirmed that several other people visiting the lake that evening were also bitten during the chaos in the water.
Just from trying to help.
Yeah, and they had to begin receiving immediate rabies treatment. And reading through the township's public warnings, this is where it gets chilling.
Oh, the warning is very stark.
The township of Mahwah urged anyone who may have come into contact with the beaver to immediately notify local health officials for evaluation.
Anyone.
They didn't just say if you were bitten, they cast an incredibly wide net. Why are health officials so concerned about mere contact?
To understand the township's urgent response, we have to look at the virology of the Rabid family.
Okay, the virus family responsible for rabies.
Yes. Rabies is not an infection you can take a wait-and-see approach with. It is an acutely lethal viral disease.
No room for error.
Once clinical symptoms begin to appear, the fatality rate is effectively 100%. The virus has evolved a terrifyingly efficient mechanism for hijacking the host's body to ensure its own transmission.
It's essentially a hostile takeover of the animal's central nervous system, right?
That is exactly what it is.
Because from my notes on the virology, the virus doesn't travel through the bloodstream like most infections, which is why the immune system doesn't immediately flag it.
That is the stealth mechanism of rabies. When the virus enters the body, usually through a bite or saliva entering an open wound, it binds to the peripheral nerves.
Okay.
It then uses a process called retrograde axonal transport. It literally travels up the nerve fibers, millimeter by millimeter, entirely bypassing the bloodstream and evading the host's immune response.
Wow.
It moves stealthily straight up the spinal cord and into the brain.
So it's taking the back roads to avoid triggering the body's alarm system?
Perfect analogy, yes.
And once it hits the brain, it actively changes the animal's behavior to make sure it spreads to a new host. That explains the relentless aggression and the total loss of fear we saw in the water.
It alters the neurochemistry.
The virus needed that beaver to attack something.
It induces rage and hyperaggression, but it does something even more insidious, which directly answers your question about why the township casts such a wide net.
Oh, right, the mere contact warning.
The virus concentrates in the salivary glands. To ensure that this highly infectious saliva isn't just swallowed into the stomach and destroyed by stomach acid, the virus induces a symptom called hydrophobia.
I've heard of that, fear of water.
Right, but it's really a severe, painful spasm of the throat muscles at the mere sensation of swallowing or encountering water.
Which means the animal's mouth is just overflowing with infectious virus-laden saliva because it physically cannot swallow.
Precisely.
And now we put that animal into a frantic, violent struggle in a lake with multiple human beings.
Exactly the issue.
Yeah.
The chaotic nature of that aquatic fight creates a massive exposure radius.
Just from splashing around.
Think about the physical dynamics. Splashing, thrashing, grappling. A single microscopic scratch from a claw that had saliva on it becomes a vector.
Oh, wow.
A splash of lake water, mixed with the animal's foaming saliva, hitting an open wound, or getting into a mucous membrane like the eyes, the nose, or the mouth, that constitutes a life-or-death exposure.
In a high adrenaline fight like that, you might not even realize you scrape your knuckle on a rock or sustained a microabrasion from the beaver's claws.
You wouldn't feel it at all.
You're completely focused on survival and getting the child to safety. But if that microscopic virus enters that tiny scrape, the biological clock starts ticking immediately.
It is a desperate race against that axonal transport.
Millimeter by millimeter.
Right. The post-exposure prophylaxis, this series of rabies vaccines and immunoglobulins, is highly effective, but it must be administered before the virus reaches the central nervous system.
You have to beat it to the brain.
Once it crosses that threshold and symptoms appear, medicine has very few answers. That is why public health officials cannot afford a margin of error. If you were in that water, or if you touched that animal, you must assume exposure and begin the prophylactic protocol.
It is staggering to process the velocity of how this escalated.
Yeah.
You start your Sunday evening at 6 p.m., looking out over a perfectly still lake, enjoying the golden hour.
The picture of peace.
And within minutes, you are submerged in a chaotic, multi-person wrestling match with a 70-pound rabid animal wielding iron-fortified teeth.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
And the physical fight is just the preamble to a terrifying race to the emergency room to stop an invisible, universally fatal virus from creeping up your nervous system.
It really demonstrates the fragility of our controlled environments.
Yeah, that park didn't protect them.
The physical infrastructure of a park cannot filter out the microscopic, pathogen-driven realities of the ecosystem. The boundaries we draw between human spaces and wild spaces are ultimately arbitrary.
It totally reconfigures how you look at the natural world around your own neighborhood. You picture that glassy water, the quiet sunset, the families fishing, and suddenly you realize exactly what kind of chaotic, microscopic, and terrifying things might be lurking just beneath the surface, waiting to trigger a cascade of events.
It does. And I want to leave you with a final, somewhat unsettling thought to mull over on your own regarding the psychology of this event.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've talked extensively about the biology of the virus and the animal, but consider the human element.
The rescuers.
Multiple everyday people instinctively jumped into a dark, thrashing lake to physically wrestle a highly aggressive wild animal just to save an 8-year-old child.
Incredible bravery.
A single microscopic virus in one animal didn't just hijack that beaver. It temporarily turned a peaceful community park into a biological hazard zone, and it forced a group of bystanders to unknowingly risk exposure to a lethal disease. It makes you wonder, if you were standing on the shore of Lake Henry that Sunday evening, hearing the splashing and the frantic barking of that small dog, knowing the unpredictable and invisible dangers that nature harbors, how far would you be willing to jump into the chaos?
Okay, one question for you. What could have caused the beaver to become so aggressive toward multiple people at the lake? And should authorities increase wildlife monitoring in public parks? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.